Alright, so for my low poly scene, I'm going to do kind of an outer space themed one. And I got a little bit of a head start on it today at work, so I'll kind of show you kind of what I made. So this is kind of like a big sphere. Just hide this camera. So this is kind of like a big globe that I made, and it looks all jagged and crazy. But if you jump into the camera, you can start to see it's kind of starting to form like maybe some mountain ranges or craters or whatever. So let's see how this was made. Alright, so we can see that it almost kind of looks like a golf ball, sort of. But it's actually a sphere. And so if we just hide this, make one from scratch. So this is the sphere as we know it. Right, looks pretty standard. But we can actually change this sphere into other different types of spheres. So the default is standard, but we can change this to these other words, and it will change kind of the layout of the polygons. Now if you look at this kind of from the outside with the line mode turned off, it's not really going to look too different, but that's why we want to turn on our display line mode. And so the one that I started with was the Icosahedron. And what the reason this one's kind of cool is because it makes even shaped triangles. Like you can see all the different triangles on this are relatively uniform in shape, and that gives us a little bit better of a base to build off of than, say, something like the octahedron, because the way that these are smaller, actually quite a lot smaller than the sides up here. And it's not like gonna be bad. I mean, I'm not gonna kind of grade you down or you know, harp on you for picking a different starting point, but at least for me, I think with the idea that I've got, because I'm going to kind of do like a miniature planet, I want kind of a good base sphere to start with. So I will set this to Icosahedron and scale this up a good amount. And to get that kind of bumpy effect, you can see here, even though I have them hidden, you can see that this is still a primitive sphere object. It's not editable, at least yet. What I'm doing is I'm adding a displacer deformer to it. And that is doing all the work to give me the shape. So I will create the displacer as a child by holding Shift, and that pops down there. And then if I jump over to the shading tab, what I want to do is in this little slot that says shader, I want to click the arrow and add a noise. And I'm doing this because I'm doing kind of a globe shape. I'll show you in a second how to do like a landscape if you wanted to do like a mountain range or a forest or something like kind of more like ground looking. But for anything that's going to want to be sort of a planet in nature, I want to add this displacer deformer and then this noise. It'll probably be a little hard to see, but if I raise this height value to say like 50, we can see that this is starting to like get kind of lumpy. And if I raise this more, we can see that this effect is starting to get more pronounced. So what this displacer deformer is doing is it's just kind of jumbling up the polygons, and it's doing that in a way much like a bump map. You know, we've used bump maps for like wood and concrete and metal and stuff. Anywhere that's white, it wants to push outwards, and anywhere that's black, it wants to push inwards. So if we click this, we can kind of see that this is this kind of blurry, jumbly kind of mess. But we can click the noise button and change it from noise, and we've got like a ton of different options that'll give us kind of different effects. But one of the things that I definitely wanted to do, and I did in mine, was I adjusted the contrast value because I wanted certain parts to push out to create like the mountain range effect, and then other parts to just be kind of left alone. So by changing this actually kind of sucks that you can't see the whole thing. If I make this really tall, hopefully we'll be able to see all of it. So if you keep your eye up here, you'll see that as I change this contrast value, the white and black values become more contrasted. There's less difference between the white and blacks. It's almost like you're left with pure black or pure white, and what you can kind of see this is doing is it's in some areas leaving it alone, and in other areas it's making it stick like way out. And so I don't really want to spend 20 minutes recreating exactly how I had my noise shader set up, because that's kind of part of the fun exploration process for you guys. I'm just going to stick with what I came up with at work, but if you really want to know, I added a layer, and I've got two noise shaders working together, one with this set of settings. If you really wanted to follow along to a T, go ahead and pause the video, but I would welcome you to kind of make your own thing. So let's get going on the next part of what we want to make, and I think like usual, it's a good idea to set up your render resolution to at least the proper aspect ratio, because we can see the little grayed outlines on the sides of our viewport. If I bump this up to like 90, we can see these lines. This will help us kind of set up our camera and get kind of the feeling for our scene a little bit better, because I kind of want to make like a rocket ship like blasting off kind of like the surface of this moon or whatever. So I want, you know, a good amount of the ground visible, but I know I want some amount of sky kind of visible up here. So I want to at least for now kind of go with this camera placement. So if I turn that camera on, we can see that we're working up here. So to start my little rocket ship, I will start with a cylinder and move this way up here. Cool. Oops. Meant to turn that off. Alright, so this we're going to name Moon, and this will be the start of our ship. So just good habits. It's easy to name things one at a time as you make them, as opposed to needing to name 1,000 things at the end of your project because you've gone for 2 weeks and not renamed anything. That's never a fun situation to be in. So one of the main staples of this low poly look is actually not using very many subdivisions. Kind of as the name implies, low poly or low polygon means that you don't actually have a lot of geometry to make kind of like smooth edges. Although if you wanted to, you know, you're certainly welcome to maybe make certain stuff high poly and certain stuff low poly. That would be maybe a cool way to differentiate yourself. Like in this scene, kind of for example, this kind of base that's built into the side of this mountain, this looks a little bit smoother than maybe the ground and stuff does. So this has some more subdivisions as opposed to the ground. So I'm going to lower my rotation segments, and I'm not really sure exactly how far down I want to go. It's kind of all just guesswork. But we'll just start making this editable. So I want to select all and optimize it because it was a cylinder, and cylinders need to be optimized in order to bevel and make knife cuts and all that fun stuff. So I'm going to select the top, and I'm going to kind of shrink this down just start getting the effect of a cone, kind of. And I'm just going to add some knife cuts. Just kind of go through this. Cool. Select all these, do a little bit of an inner extrude, and then come in, maybe to start making the housing for the bottom of the rocket. And then have this part come down a little bit, so this will be kind of actual the rocket itself. Just kind of scale this down, do another inwards extrude, and then stick this up. And if I do like smoke or exhaust or any sort of flame or whatever, they'll all be kind of coming out of this bottom part. So I'm going to kind of zip through a lot of this modeling. At this point, I think we are all very comfortable with using like our loop select and our bevels and all that kind of cool stuff. Just making something up. There's really not a ton of rhyme or reason behind this. I know everyone will have kind of a different scene, so just kind of basically follow the, I guess the spirit of what I'm doing. Not necessarily, if you're not going to be making a rocket ship, this might not be the most applicable thing to you, but if you can apply kind of some of these ideas to maybe making like a tree, or I don't know, maybe like a barn, or like a silo, or something like a windmill, whatever you want to make. This will be a pretty applicable shape, starting with a cylinder and lowering it down to maybe only 8 or 10 segments, and then just using your different modeling tools, extrude, knife, all that to kind of make whatever shape you end up needing to make. So I'm going to get going on some basic materials, I think. Just to get started. So we're going to make the bulk of our rocket ship kind of white. And then we'll add some different colored striping. Cool. I think it's a good start for the spaceship itself. Let's make like a little window or something. So we'll start with a cylinder, turn on snapping, just get this guy to jump up here for us, scale it down, probably have it stick out off the side. I'll actually probably make it a child and just zero out these different position values. And then, oops, just pull it out here. up a little, something like that maybe. Again, lower our segments. 10's a good number for us for this effect. Just jump into my side camera, and then that way I can rotate this. Get this to kind of line up with the side as if it was actually attached to this ship. Again, it's a cylinder, so we want to optimize it. And then that way we can properly do our extrusions and all that fun stuff. So I'm just kind of extruding that in. Probably apply the black material to this one. I'll just name this ship white. What's next? So if we jump into our camera, we can kind of start getting this position, start maybe coming up with an idea for where and how we want to set up our scene, maybe start coming up with an early idea for kind of what story we want to tell. You know, is it landing? Is it blasting off? Kind of, you know, setting up the idea behind, you know, what the scene is. It doesn't need to have some deep, you know, artistic meaning. You know, it could just be as simple as a rocket ship blasting off a moon. But you know, maybe you want to do like a log cabin, and maybe there's like a little fireplace, or you know, like a little bonfire or something out on the front porch. You know, whatever. Kind of come up with a little something that sort of sets the mood for your scene. Alright, so that's pretty cool. I think I want to maybe make a gray for our moon. And we can always go back and get into doing image textures or whatever. So one thing you'll probably notice is the surface of our moon and the surface of our ship will look very different. You can see kind of how triangulated and jagged the moon is, and the way we did that was here on the Fong tag, which is these two little orange dots. The default probably has this checkbox being set to off, but if you check it on, the value will probably be at default of 90, the Fong angle, and this is sort of telling the computer like what angle you're looking at this shape for it to try to smooth that angle out. It's kind of a short explanation for it. But if we lower this, basically what it's doing is it's telling the computer like don't smooth this out as much. You know, kind of make it more and more jagged. So if we do that to the Fong tag on our ship as well, we can start to pull this down, and you can now start to see the different edges on the spaceship. Cool. So it would be a good idea to save. This is the jaggedness of my mountains might be a little kind of extreme. I think now, looking at the scale of the spaceship, this might be a little too much. So the way that I have my displacer noise shader set up. I've got these different sliders, so I can just pull these down. And I did this by making a layer. So now this is a layer shader, which is found right here. And then inside the layer shader, it works just like Photoshop. You know, you've got your different blending modes, and I'm just adding one on top of the other to get this effect. So I think this looks a little bit more kind of mountain rangey. But now that I'm thinking about it, it wouldn't be a moon without craters. Craters would be a good idea to add to my scene. You know, if you were doing a forest, you know, you might want a mix of trees and bushes, or like rocks or boulders. So just kind of come up with, you know, ideas that sort of make sense and are applicable to your setting. So I know if I want to add craters to this, I'm trying to think on the fly how I should do that. Well, I think the first thing I'll have to do is probably make this editable, but I don't want to get rid of the original copy, so I'm gonna drag up a copy and group that and just name this old. This is kind of like my backup folder that I can revisit. You know, if I make a mistake and I delete the moon, I can just open this back up. So I just usually keep this handy and just turn all these check marks and turn off all the little stoplights. So if we make this editable by hitting C, we can now right-click and go current state to object, because as you saw, hitting C on this moon, I still have the displacer. The displacer is still kind of doing its thing, but I want to make this whole thing, like, I basically want to solidify, like kind of lock in, you know, my look here. So I'm going to do current state to object, and that makes this one down here, so I can delete that. Cool, so I've got this moon, and now there's nothing crazy going on. This is just a solid piece of geometry. But I know that I don't need all this other stuff down here. I mean, my camera shows actually very little of this moon because I scaled it up so big. So I'm gonna jump to one of my other cameras. Front, H. Cool. So I can probably delete, you know, like 90% of this. So if I go to my rectangle selection and uncheck only select visible elements, I can select all this, delete all that, because I just know that I don't need, you know, if I'm gonna have a camera that, you know, maybe sticks up here, and who knows, if I decide to animate it, I might animate the camera kind of, looking up or something to kind of follow the rocket blasting off or whatever. You know, I don't need the other 90% of that moon. Just taking up memory, slowing my scene down, you know, all that junk down there. And that'll actually be a advantage to us, because now that I have thought of how I want to make my craters, I know that I didn't need all that other junk down there. So to make the craters, what I think I want to do is start with a sphere. And again, I will make this sphere an icosahedron, just so that way kind of everything is triangle based. I know I've said when we were modeling you know, the drone and the bottles and all that, usually triangles are something that you want to avoid because they make stuff look less realistic when it comes to actually rendering, you know, a realistic looking image. But in this case, we've got a style, you know, a stylized kind of cartoony look, at least that I'm going for. So I can kind of throw some of those rules out the window. That's why stuff like this is fun, because you kind of get to break some of the rules and you know, kind of do stuff a little differently. So I'm going to lower the lower the segment count of that icosahedron. So I'm going to name this crater rock. And I think what I want to do is I want to use a cloner to populate the craters along the moon. Yeah, I think that's what I want to do. Alright, so I will save just in case. What I do might crash the computer, who knows, you know. Computers are temperamental sometimes. So we'll make the cloner, hold down Alt, and what I want to do is set the cloner to object, because usually typically we've used like linear or radial or grid array. I'm not sure if we've used the object cloner. So you can see that that hid the little moon rock thing that I made. But now I've got this object slot, and what I want to do is I want to, again, save just in case, because I think this might upset the computer. I want to click and drag my moon object down into this object slot on the cloner. And, alright, it didn't blow the computer up. Oh, it did. This is why you save. Saving when you use cloners is very good. Because what this did is it made a copy of the moon rock on every point on the moon by default. That's a lot of moon rocks. A lot. It's like a few thousand probably. So I'm gonna change this. The setting for that is this distribution setting, and it's being set to vertex. Vertex is another word for points. So each point on this moon kind of ground, it got a moon rock spawned on it. So if I set this to surface, what this will do is it will instead give me a count number. So if I play around with this count, we can see that we are now getting a more reasonable number of moon rocks kind of scattered along the surface of our moon. So we can see, if I turn off line mode, our gray here is the moon and the white is our moon rocks, which is kind of cool. And I can change this seed number. I can just click and scroll with my scroll wheel, or click the down arrow, and this will basically tell the computer to, you know, generate them again in a different pattern. And I can jump into my camera and maybe just kind of frame this a little bit and come up with a camera angle that shows off a couple of these moon rocks, but I'm not actually going to leave them sticking out. I'm actually going to use these to make the craters. So again, I will save. So what I want to do is I want to make this cloner, this moon rock cloner, editable. But again, just like always, I want to drag a copy just in case I want to go back. Drag it down into the old folder. So this one we will make. This one, actually, before we make it editable, I think I want to add a random effector to the cloner. So with the cloner selected, you can see I can just add a random, and this will kind of shift these along, because by default in the parameters tab it has a value in X, Y, and Z, and I don't necessarily want X and Z, I think. Not too much. What I want is, I think I want Y. No, it is Z. Okay, so I don't want much X and Y, but I want a good amount of Z, because what this will do is it will make some of these are kind of further up, some of them are sunk in more, and if I check on scale and check uniform scale, what I can do is enter in a small number, and this will kind of vary the size of these moon rocks. So you can see we've got some big ones, some small ones, some that are sunk in a little bit deeper into the surface, other ones that are a little bit more shallow. So now I think this is cool. So this one actually, I want to delete that old copy. So these two, just drag copies down, tuck those away, just in case we gotta go back to them. So now this one, I want to make this one editable. And all these, select all these, hit C on those, make all those editable. And they're all different objects, which is cool, but it's not what I want to do. What I want to do is combine them all, because I want to use a bool, booleans. Some of you guys have used that in the modeling menu, but when you use the bool object, you want only two pieces. So what I mean by that is I have to connect objects plus delete. So now you see that all these moon craters, I just ungroup that, get rid of all that junk. So I've got these crater, what I've called craters, and what I've called moon. And again, I will save just in case, because just like using cloners, sometimes the bool object right here can be temperamental. And what the bool object is, I know that's a fun word to say, bool. It's pretty silly, but it's pretty much like the 3D version of Pathfinder. You know, in Illustrator, you can draw one shape, and you can draw another shape, and you can like cut one shape out of another. It's pretty much the 3D version of that. So what I want to do is I want to drag these two objects up into the bool, and that disappeared. So now the order that these are in kind of matters sometimes, and also the setting that it's on. So this is always a really fun thing to try to do in a live demonstration, because there are so many different checkboxes to check on and off. There we go. Wasn't too bad. Alright, so now we can see that we've got the surface of the moon, but we've got all these big white chunks kind of taken out of it, which look pretty cool. So then if I select the Phong tag on my craters object, and I just lowered that one down to 0 as well, now we've got our cool patented low poly effect. So now we've got some real big craters and some real little ones. This is looking pretty cool for the surface of our object, but we can see that some are bright white and some are gray, which is kind of weird. It's not exactly the look I'm going for. So if I rearrange the materials that I've got so that I'm applying the material to the bool and not just the moon, this will now apply the crater material, the gray material, to everything, which is cool. So now if I just kind of reorient my camera, because I want to see some of these, you know, I spent all this effort making them, I want to make sure that they're visible. So this is kind of an example I want to show you guys that you can sort of change the idea, maybe change the message of your scene like as you're developing it, you know, kind of take it one object at a time, you know, one piece at a time, and figure out, you know, maybe you want to make a really densely populated forest, and maybe make your scene feel kind of like claustrophobic or sort of dark and ominous, maybe, or maybe you want to go the opposite route and maybe make like a abandoned desert or something where there's not much, and maybe it's like a mirage or whatever, you know, kind of stranded out in the desert sort of thing. Just, you know, kind of come up with some sort of idea that then will lead to more ideas, more objects that you can implement and create for your scene. So now that I've made those craters, I kind of do want to have some sort of rocks, some sort of boulders on the surface. So I'm maybe going to copy back this moon rock cloner thing and turn all these back on, and maybe make them a bit smaller. Just sort of change the, I can change the random effector. The random effector also has a seed value that I can change. Alright, so this cloner, this random effector is not doing anything. If I check it on and off, you can see it's having no effect, and that is because in the cloner, in the effectors tab, there's no effectors listed. What we need to do is drag this random effector down, and now we can see that this random effector is now having an effect. So I can scrub through this seed value and scrub through this seed value to change kind of the populating of these rocks. Doesn't make much sense for me to have a rock that's floating in the middle of a crater, although I guess if it's in space it would be in zero gravity or something, I don't know. But I'm just gonna move the cloner until I don't see anything weird. So this one seems to have placed the moon rocks in a way that I like, where there are none kind of floating or doing anything weird. So I'll make these editable. That, make all these editable. Again, do connect objects plus delete, and these ones can be called moon rocks. And we'll copy our moon shader and maybe make this just a little bit brighter and apply that one to the moon rocks. So that way when we go to render, they will look a little different from each other. So it's probably a good idea to start grouping some of these. So if I group this and I call this moon ground, so we've got our moon base and the moon rocks. Just to have good file organization. Maybe move my ship over a little bit so that it looks like it's going to kind of lift off from one of these smoother parts. It probably wouldn't land in the middle of a crater. And now that I'm looking at it, I think making some small little landing legs would be a good idea. So if I just zero this all out, make this cube, so there will kind of be almost like little sticks that land out. That's probably too big. Spell it right. Make that editable. So I can just use my modeling tools to extrude out a little kind of foot. Just going to kind of rotate this just a little bit. Probably use a cloner to make 3 of these landing legs. So if I do a radial cloner, set it down to 3. change my plane to something that makes a little bit more sense. And just center out that position just so that I know it's kind of centered around the ship. Lower my radius a bit. And it looks like my legs are sticking out backwards. So I want to jump over to the transform tab and spin these outwards, 180 degrees it looks. And then rotate them out so that they stick outwards a little. Yeah, like this. Just bring them back up. Increase the radius. There's a little handlebar for me. I can pull. So that looks pretty good. Cool. Cool. Yeah, something like that I think looks pretty good. So now I think the last thing that I want to model probably is like the exhaust smoke coming out. I think probably not a whole lot more that I need to add. I could maybe make like a little base or like a landing pad or something, you know, if I wanted to, but I kind of want to just jam through this for you guys. So I think I'm going to start with a pyramid or a cone maybe. Yeah, I think I'm going to start with a cone. So if I just zero out this cone, it's super huge, but I can shrink it down. Turn on my line mode. So this has got way too many rotation segments. So it seemed like 10 was our magic number. And I think I want to add in couple more height segments. That looks pretty good, I think. So this one we can probably use another displacer object. It's probably a good idea to get us going. So in this displacer object, again, I want to go to the shading tab and load in a noise shader. See, that did something kind of wild to it. But like I say all the time, when you make a cylinder editable, you have to optimize it, because you can see down here something crazy's happening. Like it's like we're looking up into our plume of smoke, which is not what we want. So if we make this editable, we can select all and optimize, and then when we come back out to model mode, we can see that we are no longer seeing up into our smoke cloud, because the displacer object is now behaving properly. So I can just jump into this noise, kind of play around with the contrast and stuff. And I think one thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of fall off to this, because we can see the smoke is kind of escaping out of the top of our little rocket nozzle, which is implausible. So even though we don't want this to necessarily be realistic, it does kind of annoy me. So I want to fix it. So I'm going to set a sphere fall off. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shrink the scale. And we can see that now when we if we shrink the scale of the fall off down, and then we move it down, we can see that as the top here leaves this yellow ring, so this yellow ring is kind of like the outer perimeter of our effect. We can see that the geometry up here is it gets messed up here, but if we pull this down and move that out of the way, it's now getting straightened back out, which is, I think, more along the lines of what I want. So because the bottom of our smoke cloud probably wouldn't be flat, I'm just going to pull these down. So that way they're going all the way down into the surface of the moon. Actually, probably fan them out too. So scale these out a bit. Cool. So now if we jump back to our displacer, so it looks like we need to adjust the fall off a bit, because down here at the bottom it's no longer getting displaced all the way that we want it to. So if I pull this out, pull this one out, just kind of keep adjusting this. That's starting to look pretty cool for just our smoke cloud. So now if we jump back to our camera, just kind of adjust the framing of this. Do some cool Dutch angling, because that totally makes photographs way cooler. Totally. Alright, I think that's a pretty good spot to take a break. So if I resume, okay, so if I click render, this doesn't look too great. I want to lower the falling angle on my smoke cloud, I know that. So yeah, this is pretty bland looking. Let's get some lights and some textures and all that fun stuff going. So I think I'm gonna try to start with the sunlight. At least I'm gonna see what this ends up giving us. This one. That's right. This is the weird thing that has, it's like controlled by like the time and like the latitude and longitude, which is like really just a totally abstract way to get this to do stuff. So it's going to be kind of, it's definitely annoying trying to get it positioned the way that you want it to. That's for sure. And you can't like move it or anything. So it's like, I guess what I'll do is I'll just move my whole scene down to compensate for the fact that, nope. Please cooperate. There we go. So this way, at least now my sun thing, I can see it, like it's at least visible within my viewport here. So I can move this around, but I'm probably just going to delete this tag. And then now I can position this however I'd like. The time thing is kind of a gimmick. I've honestly never really found a way to get it to work the way that I want to. I would rather just rotate the light the way that I want to rotate the light. So that's something. No. We want to switch our shadows to area shadows, and probably change the color of this to be a little bit more yellow and a lot less saturated, because the reason that little sun object thing gets colored is because it's assuming you're going through Earth's atmosphere. And Earth's atmosphere is what makes the sun look like different colors based on the time of day. Whereas if we were out in space, the sun and its light would be relatively entirely white, maybe ever so slightly warm colored, as opposed to like that really bright like morning orange kind of thing. A little bit less applicable. So let's give ourselves a background, or a sky, and we can make this kind of spacey blue-purple colored, so it's totally a color. And we can uncheck specular and drag that into our background, and so now that background back there has some sort of color. But we can see that our areas that are in shadow are very, very, very dark. And while that's probably realistic, because there isn't much light bouncing around in areas that aren't lit when you're out in space, as realistic and scientifically proper as this is, it's probably not what I want my scene to look like. So what I'm going to do is go into my render settings, and I'm going to turn on an effect called Global Illumination, and this has a million checkboxes, but I'm just going to set it up as follows. So my primary method I will set to Quasi Monte Carlo, QMC, and my secondary method I will set to light mapping. And then my maximum depth I can probably lower, because 16 is pretty high, so maybe something like 4 would be a little bit more applicable. And I'm going to set the samples down to low. I'm going to lower some of these samples just so that it goes a little bit quicker, because I'm still like testing, you know, this isn't necessarily my final thing. But we can see that this we've got this cool like matrix effect going on the outside. But now we're starting to get a little bit of color in our dark spots, which is definitely visually an improvement, as opposed to how super stark and contrasted the pure blacks were without the GI. And it's also given us some cool coloring from our background purple. It's kind of filling in some of these shadows with a cool purple color. Although this might be a little strong in terms of the brightness and saturation. So this looks kind of cool. It's something. But I think there's a couple more effects that I want to kind of add into my scene. I think I want to try to get a little bit of depth of field going. Maybe make this kind of almost like tilt shifted, like with a lot of depth of field, kind of get this stylized look really dialed in. I actually figured out a useful effect, or a useful little tool. So here on the focus distance, there is this mouse pointer checkbox thing that I never knew what it did. But if you turn it on, you see it now turns black. And if you mouse over here, you now get a crosshair in your viewport. And if you click, if you just left click, it will set your focus distance to wherever you wanted. So I want kind of the middle of my rocket to be in focus, or at least the rocket itself. So this will get my focus distance dialed in exactly where I want it. And hopefully, as we remember, to enable our depth of field, we want to check on the depth of field map front and rear blurs. And what those do is they give us some extra sliders to pull out. So this is the front map. So I want to bring this kind of closer to my scene. And the rear map, I want to kind of leave in the background somewhere. And then in my render settings, I want to change this from standard to physical. And now in the physical menu, we've got this depth of field checkbox right here, which is useful. And if we jump into our camera and click render, hard to tell how much of this is actually in focus. That's doing something. Alright, so now that since we changed our render setting, or renderer, to physical, and we turned on the physical depth of field checkbox, we now have a new tab on our camera called physical. And what we want to do to get more depth of field, the value of this is, 8. But if you lower this to maybe 1 or like 0.5, it will make your depth of field more apparent. And so now we're starting to get that tilt shift effect where it almost looks like our scene is kind of miniaturized, where we've got our tiny little rocket ship and this stuff in the background is blurred out, which at least for me is the effect that I kind of want to go for. So if you don't want a very high amount of depth of field, basically a lower value here, a smaller value means higher depth of field. It's pretty much just backwards. So if I jump back in and I mess around with my front map blur and my rear map blur, I can probably push this effect a little bit further even. Go crazy. 0.1. Whoa. That's alright, that's a lot of depth of field. Too much. I'm just going to keep entering in numbers to kind of get the feel. What I'm looking at here is the front amount of depth of field. So I like how much depth of field is visible here, kind of in the bottom of frame, which is closer to us. But there's too much in the background, so I think I'm just going to pull this back blur out a little bit more. And that's what's nice about the physical depth of field, is you've got a good amount more control. When you're using the standard render, like if you guys remember back to the bottle product assignment. For some people, it was a little tricky to figure out exactly how much depth of field they wanted, because you just kind of have a little bit less control using the front map and the rear map in standard render, whereas in physical render it just seems for whatever reason to work a little bit more intelligently. I think this is still quite a lot, so we're going to try to pull that back a whole bunch more. Alright, I don't want to mess around with it too much more. I think that's good enough. I think my sky is a little bit too dark for me. Or at least the amount of colored light kind of that's in my shadows. When my sky color was brighter purple, it was putting more purple color into my scene, which I liked, but the background color itself was too dark, or it was too bright. So now that I've got the background color as dark as I want it to be, it's not giving me enough kind of purple color into my scene. But what I can actually do is in the material setting, and we'll just call this background sky, I can go to the Illumination tab, and I can actually cheat the computer. I can tell the computer to generate GI, so at 100%, its default value. I can raise this up to like maybe 300. So this is basically telling the computer to like give it more color, because what the global illumination is doing is it's kind of looking around the environment. So it's saying like, hey, we're surrounded by this purple sky. Let's add some purple color and purple light into our scene. So now this is more purple than I had, and it's closer to what I want. Might be ever so slightly too much. I'm going to try like 225. And because my render settings are a little bit lower, this is still pretty quick to go through. So this is cool, I think. I'm pretty happy with how the scene is kind of set up. If I just hide that camera, just hide the light real quick. I want to animate this real quick. So what I want to do is we've got the smoke. So it's the smoke cloud. And what I actually want to do is I want to ungroup the smoke cloud from the ship. So I'm going to animate the ship lifting off. But I don't want the smoke cloud to follow along with the ship. I kind of want to just make it kind of blast, like a puff of air. Oops. And then that way I can animate the ship like lifting off, kind of away from the smoke cloud. So let's figure out how we want to animate the smoke. I think what we can do is if we move the anchor point of the smoke. Interesting. That's fun. If we lower the anchor point down to kind of down to the bottom of it so that it's aligned with the surface of the little moon. I think what we can do is we can probably keyframe this, probably keyframe this upwards and have it kind of follow along the ship. So for the time being, we will hide the smoke and get our little spaceship kind of planted on the ground. I'm just going to rotate my legs a little so that they line up with the ground a little bit more. Cool. Not perfect, but it'll get the job done, I think. So, with all this in place, I want to freeze my position. I actually want to freeze all transformations. So with the ship selected, I open up freeze transformations, because we see we've got all these crazy numbers here, but if I click freeze all, it will turn all these down to nice 0, 0, 0, all that good stuff. So at frame 0, I'm going to set a bunch of position keyframes, and I think I can probably do this in 120 frames, I'd say. So from frame 0 to, let's say, frame 30, the rocket ship will be kind of staying in place, and we'll let the smoke kind of like build up. Sort of like how the drone, we animated the drone for the first second or two. The drone stays still while it's kind of generating its lift, its thrust, and then from here we will then animate the rocket going up. So actually we'll kind of make it go a little wild and have it rotate and do some fun stuff. Feel free to add sound effects while you, exactly, why the smoke builds up and all that fun stuff. Cool, so that's something. Let's jump into our camera, and so we can see just a little kind of tiny little piece of our landing gear still visible. At least for me, I kind of want it to fly out of frame. So I'm just going to keyframe the Y position a little bit more. So now we can watch. Cool. It doesn't look like it's rotating necessarily the right way. So I actually want to move my anchor point down to where the nozzle would be. And so from here, it should rotate the way that I want it to, or not. Interesting. Looks like we broke everything. Classic fashion. Reset our 0 point keyframe, or 0 frame keyframe. I want it to rotate just ever so slightly, just so it kind of looks like it's like a cartoon bottle rocket almost, sort of flying up. And I think the positioning of that's pretty good, but I definitely want to do a little bit of work in the timeline to edit our graph edit a little bit, particularly for the Y position, because as we see, this keyframe is this one. We definitely don't want it to be leveling out. Why? And I feel like we could probably even delete that one. So this one, it kind of gradually lifts off and then it just goes up to full speed. So let's move that out of the way. Play this again. Still not much of a fan of that. So I think what I want to do is grab this keyframe and I'm going to pull this Bezier handle out to the right quite a bit. And just see what this gets me. So this will mean it'll kind of take off a little bit slower, but then once it gets going, it'll go a little bit quicker. And I like that, but I actually think I want to make this whole thing actually happen a little bit faster. Nope, that was not what we wanted to do. There we go. That's a little bit like more cartoony kind of bottle rocket feeling, I'd say. So now with the liftoff sorted, we can revisit our smoke cloud. Let's jump out of our camera, turn our smoke cloud on. So while the smoke cloud is down here, I know again, we will probably want to freeze the transformations on it. And at 0, I don't want any smoke. So I think what I want to do is lower the Y scale all the way down. Actually, how do we want to do this? Maybe turn the ship. Actually think I want to raise this back up. And as far as animation for your scenes, if you're doing maybe like a mountain, you could maybe animate the trees swaying a little bit, or if you do like a fire, like a little bonfire, you can animate the displacer object to get your fire to kind of like wave around, like like the flames are wisping around, sort of. Just come up with some sort of simple animation. If you don't have anything that, if you wouldn't have like a log cabin like fly up like a rocket ship. I mean, you could. I mean, that'd be pretty sweet. But if that doesn't make sense to you, then come up with some sort of simplistic animation. Feel free to get cartoony with it. If you want to have a flying house, go wild and recreate Up, or whatever you want to do. Yeah, just have some sort of animation. It doesn't need to be super elaborate. I think the smoke cloud might give me a little bit of trouble. I think we'll figure it out. So what I want to do, I think, is line up my positioning here. So I'm lining up the anchor point with where the nozzle lines up, and I think now what I want to do is animate the scale of this. So at frame, let's say frame 20, I want it to be maybe not like this. Maybe at frame like 40 or 50, once it's lifted off, we will want it. This is going to be trickier than I thought. this up again. Cool, looks good enough. Alright, so at whatever frame I'm at, let's just keyframe a bunch of these. Because who knows how this is going to work. Not me. So if we lower this down, and this probably seems kind of boring, but troubleshooting like this and sort of problem solving is definitely a skill that you will develop as you get more experienced in 3D. And at least I know when I was learning, kind of teaching myself cinema and sort of doing tutorials on the internet, it was sometimes a blessing in disguise when people would actually go about something in like a roundabout way, because you know sometimes you learn some stuff you didn't expect to. And certainly every artist is going to work in the programs, you know, kind of differently. Everyone's going to think differently and approach problems differently. So I'm kind of just winging it. So frame 0, it's all shrunk down. And that didn't work. So here, I need to scale this out more. Yeah, that's what we want. Scale not want to cooperate. It's like the scale isn't keyframing. Alright, not great, but it's something. This is really not going the way that I wanted it to. It's like the displacer got messed up too, kind of. That does not look great. I think I will probably pick this up next time. I will stop the recording here, and I will troubleshoot this and let you guys know what I come up with. And we'll finish up the rendering and all that stuff at the beginning of next class.